Thank you. It's going to be quite an eclectic presentation. I'm going to touch on a number of things. One is some part of, whereas 40 years is just stated, I really was on the asset-based side of the industry, working for major trucking companies. And lastly, what I call some universal truths, both on a personal and a professional basis. On a personal basis, the universal truth is no matter what your experience or how much you think you know, it's astonishing how little you find out you really do know each and every day. And that's what my experience has been most recently, is that to relearn how dumb I really have been about things that I thought I understood very clearly. The agenda is pretty straightforward. I'm going to talk a little bit about my background in the industry to give some context to my comments, really more than anything else, not to do anything beyond that, although I am on the twilight of my career. I hope to retire. I'll be 65 in July, and hopefully move on to other things and enjoy my grandchildren. I'm going to talk once again about some developing trends which I think are significant in the industry and in the 3PL segment of the industry, which you may or may not be aware of. And if you are, hopefully they'll be resounding to you. I want to talk a little bit about the company, because the company, well, this is not a commercial message, it is extremely innovative, and it defies description in some regards. And I have learned that on a first-hand basis and have been affiliated with it since it started, as stated, 18 years ago, and joined it now 3 years ago, this February. And the land of Oz is what I refer to it as, and there are some lessons I think that we can take away from the organization which may have application, I think they do, in any industry, and certainly in the industries that you represent today. And those are the way to win what is most important, and I'll finish my comments about that. My career began in 1972 with Roadway Express. Back then they had a very vibrant training program, and I was one of those trainees until what they had was the Valentine Massacre of 1973, when all trainees were eliminated and we were put into some other job function at that time. I then moved to Preston Trucking Company, and I don't know if you're familiar with Preston, but Preston was noted in the early 80s and mid-80s as one of the most innovative companies in America, and a company which turned its relationship as a union trucking company from being very adversarial with its employees to being noted by Tom Peters in 2 of his books. One, A Great Place to Work, another one, the top 50 companies in America, as one of the top employee relation-based or participatory management-based organizations in the country. During my career at Preston, I had a number of functions, but during that segment, I was Vice President of Human Resources and Labor Relations, and was intimately involved with that change effort at the organization. It has some context as I talk about what I see at Logistics Plus and what I've learned since coming to this organization. A variety of functions with both the USF Corporation, which was acquired, as you may recall, by YRC Worldwide in 2002, I think it was, Scott? 2005. And then recently, almost 3 years ago I've joined Logistics Plus. One of the relevant points in my experience by YRC is that I was charged with establishing a vertical focused on the 3PL industry. Whoop, what did I just do, Scott? Did I turn it off? Okay. With the 3PL industry. We recognized at YRCW, as many trucking companies have recently recognized, that we had an adversarial relationship with 3PLs. And 3PLs were becoming a much larger segment of our business. At YRCW, over $2 billion of its revenue in the year 2009 was coming from the 3PL segment, and we were in no way were we interfacing with them in a way which was complementary. So we decided to develop a vertical dedicated only to the 3PL industry, and developed a team across a multitude of functions, pricing, accounts receivable, customer service, and business development, that focused on the 3PL industry. It was a very successful initiative, and one which now companies such as FedEx, UPS, Pitt, Ohio, virtually every LTL company is now emulating that same strategy and developing a similar one. That gave me an insight into the 3PL industry, which caused me to believe that I understood it very well, because I was dealing with the top 3PLs in the country, including Logistics Plus. Then I joined them and once again learned how little I really knew about what was going on within the segment, and what really was the driving forces of that industry. Let's talk a little bit about some trends within the industry today. And what I believe to be headwinds for those that are users of domestic transportation services across all segments in the United States. Safety regulations and driver shortages are impacting, and turnover rates are impacting industry capacity severely and will continue to do so. There is tighter capacity is driving today higher transportation costs, and absent any major economic recession, you should expect to see transportation costs, I believe in the next 5 to 10 years, to continue to escalate at a rate you've not seen over the previous 10 years. And customers and carriers are becoming more discerning in the services they use, and as capacity tightens, I believe we are seeing and will continue to see a movement towards a higher usage, even today, that we see today, of third-party logistics companies, and we are seeing that trend, and you'll see some data which will support that. And 3PLs themselves are evolving from what has historically been a very transactional focus to one which is more value-based. And lastly, we're seeing a convergence within that particular segment where companies are creating more full-service logistics companies, and we're seeing through mergers and acquisitions some consolidation within the 3PL segment, even though today there is a high degree of fragmentation with those companies which are transactionally focused on some particular segment of the supply chain. This chart, which comes from the Journal of Commerce, shows that the number of truck drivers in the United States peaked in 2007, significantly declined, and while it has increased by 1.9% in 2013, the number is still significantly below the peak of 2007. The significance of this is the industry needs almost 100,000 drivers a year over the next 10 years to keep up with demand. This is being driven not by industrial growth, but 64% of the need is driven by the exits which are occurring from this particular segment of the workforce, through both voluntary, involuntary departures, and from retirements. As you may or may not know, truck drivers today are one of the most treasured resources of anybody in the transportation business because they're becoming more difficult to find, and we're finding turnover rates still that are consistently at 100%, and we're finding exits from the industry at a continuing alarming rate, and there's no way that we'll meet the demand needs as we go forward. That is, in effect, driving what we find is increased and tighter capacity constraints across segments. This comes from Morgan Stanley's Freight Pulse, and it's comparing March, June, and September of 2014 in terms of what shippers are viewing as capacity over the last 6 months. And while truckload appears to have diminished slightly, all other segments represented here, including intermodal, rail, LTL, both regional and national, ocean and air freight, other than air freight, excuse me, are increasing in tightness. We see this trend continuing as we move forward. Capacity is tightening because of an absence of resources and other economic conditions, which is going to result in a continued increase in cost to consumers. This is the Cass Freight Index report, which is domestic transportation cost across surface transportation across both LTL and truckload modes. What you see here is the number of shipments, which is represented by the blue line, is relatively constant from the 14-year span we see here. The cost in terms of the freight expenditures is going up dramatically. And we see that continuing as we go forward. So, in conclusion, the most significant trend that I think that we all need to be aware of, especially within this segment of the supply chain, domestic transportation, surface transportation, regardless of modality, is that capacity is tightening, it will continue to tighten, and that will reflect itself in higher costs due to a number of both internal and external forces. 3PL usage, as I said early on, I believe is being impacted by this because as capacity gets tight, there is a tendency, and I think a valid one, to look to 3PLs because of their access to broader capacity within the marketplace. Rather than dealing directly with a truckload supplier that may only have 1,000 drivers, by dealing with a 3PL such as C.H. Robinson, you have access to 100,000 drivers on any given day. The segment, you may not be aware, globally is $700 billion annually, and domestically it's $134 billion. And it grew by 5.2% between 2013 and 2014. Continuing to growth, and all forecasts are that it will continue to grow both domestically and globally as we move forward during the next decade. 3PLs are certainly here to stay, and they are changing and evolving as we move forward. Historically, they dealt with very transactional services, and they still do today. 81% of all 3PLs deal with domestic transportation. 78% have some international transportation segment. Warehousing, freight forwarding, and customer brokerage are the other highest used services of 3PLs or procured services from 3PLs. Those are repetitive, transactional-oriented services. We have seen and we continue to see growth amongst those value-added services that you see represented as we go down this tier. In terms of reverse logistics, supply chain consultancy, and other value-added services, and that trend is one which is growing, and we are seeing an increase in usage over the last 5 years amongst those segments of the 3PL industry. That is what's driving the mergers and acquisitions we're seeing, and the fact that more of the 3PL segment is going to be governed by the large, multifaceted players that offer a complete suite of services. Not to say that we will not have transactional-based 3PLs as we do today, but their presence in the market will not be as strong as we see today. Let me talk about Logistics Plus, both in terms of the 3PL industry and really more importantly about those things that I think are most unique about this company and which might offer value to you as you leave this presentation. Historically, as said earlier, Jim started the company in 1996. If he was here today, he would credit me for starting his company by firing him in 1996 because he worked for me at USF Red Star. In 1996, he was our terminal manager in Jamestown, New York. And at that particular time, the industry was going through a consolidation and an elimination of terminals, especially in more remote areas. I had the unfortunate task at USF Red Star to have to go to Jamestown to tell he and his staff that we were shuttering his terminal and they were all out of work. He then went to General Electric, he and two of his business associates from Jamestown that worked with him in that terminal of USF Red Star, and started as an in-house, inbound routing center for domestic shipments only in 1996. And as stated earlier, his contract for all expenses was $120,000 for the three of them. They worked out of a trailer. In 1997, they were having such success, they were diversifying their reach, and the organization asked them, as they were realizing that GE was going to expand into Mexico, to set up the logistics operations for movements between Mexico and Erie, Pennsylvania, and Grove City, Pennsylvania, where they had manufacturing in the U.S. at that time. By 1998, he had 15 teams, and GE had taken him to the Czech Republic, Poland, and Russia, where he established offices there, all in support of GE. In 1999, he had 20 people working for the organization and now opened offices in India, China, and Indonesia, and started to see his first customers. What he would state to you if he was here is that after 3 years in the organization, he suddenly realized that it wasn't such a prudent strategy to have only one customer. That he probably needed to diversify, and so as he was adding these offices, he started developing other customers. Today, GE only represents 30% of our annual revenue, whereas historically, or in the initial stages, it was 100%, as I said, as stated. By 2004, he'd grown to 100 employees in 12 countries and now had over 200 customers. And today, he has 36 offices in 20 countries, over 350 employees, $100 million in annual revenue, and over 1,000 customers. That is our building in Erie, Pennsylvania. It's the old railroad station, Union Station, that Jim bought in 2006, I believe it was, 8 years ago. It was quite derelict at the time. On top of it, we have 40 flags. Those 40 flags represent the 40 nationalities of people that work inside our office. To say it's a diverse work group is a severe understatement. We have people represented from all countries and all age groups, but it's a very young, very vibrant organization. I thought when I joined it that I understood organizational dynamics. I thought I understood what successful companies were all about, and I understood a lot about business strategy. Jim has taught me, once again, that I knew very little about that. His organization, as I said earlier, defies description. We have no formal business meetings. There is no formal business plan. We have no salespeople. How does an organization grow as this company does without business development or salespeople? It seems contrary to everybody's point of view. Certainly was contrary to my experience. What has allowed him to grow, that I formalized in my next comments, is really a focus on the customer, which I find to be truly unique, and one that other organizations have also seized and really becomes the secret to winning in today's business environment. We are today a 3PL and 4PL partner. We offer all modalities, both international and domestically. Our business is roughly 50% domestic versus international. And as Jim says, we're the company that has gas. And that is because the organization is literally focused 24/7, everybody in the organization, and that's the culture of the organization. It does not have an organizational chart. There is no